The rain had been relentless for days, a constant drumming on the roof of our small cabin nestled deep in the woods. It was the kind of rain that seeps into your bones, making the world feel damp and grey. My father, a man who knew these woods like the back of his hand, had been watching the creek with a worried frown. "It's rising fast," he'd muttered, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "Never seen it like this before." We'd spent our lives in that cabin. It was more than just wood and nails. It was a living scrapbook of our family's history. Every notch in the doorframe marked my growth. Every scuff on the floor told a story of a boisterous childhood. It was our sanctuary, the place we always felt safe. But nature, in its immense power, had other plans. The water came not as a gentle rise, but as a furious, roaring beast. The creek, normally a placid ribbon of water, swelled into a raging torrent, devouring its banks and anything in its path. I remember the sound most of all, a deafening roar that swallowed every other noise. The splintering of wood, the groaning of the earth. We scrambled for higher ground, grabbing what little we could. I clutched a photo album. My mother held onto our frantic dog, and my father. My father went back. "My hat," he yelled over the din. My father's hat. It was his most prized possession, a worn leather Stetson given to him by his own father. It was a symbol of our lineage, a connection to the past. He dashed back inside just as a massive wave, carrying logs and debris, slammed into the cabin. The structure groaned, tilted, and was then swept away in the churning, muddy water, and my father was gone with it. We screamed his name until our voices were raw, but the only answer was the merciless roar of the flood. Hours turned into an eternity. The rain finally softened to a drizzle, and a thick, eerie fog rolled in, blanketing the devastated landscape. The world was silent except for the drip of water from the remaining trees and our own ragged breaths. Hope was a flickering candle flame in a hurricane, threatening to be extinguished with every passing moment. Search and rescue teams arrived, their faces grim. They searched for days, but the flood had reshaped the land, leaving behind a chaotic mess of mud and splintered trees. They found fragments of our cabin miles downstream, but of my father there was no sign. The official search was called off. "We're sorry," they said, their words empty and hollow. "It's a recovery mission now, but we refused to give up. We couldn't." Every morning, my mother and I would walk the new, scarred shoreline, calling his name, our voices swallowed by the vast, quiet woods. The fog became a constant companion, a ghostly shroud over our grief. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath, mourning with us. We were lost in a sea of despair, clinging to the thinnest sliver of hope. It was on the 5th day, as the sun struggled to pierce the dense morning fog, that it happened. We were near a bend in the river, a place where a massive pile of debris had formed a makeshift dam. The air was unnaturally still. Suddenly, our dog, who had been listlessly sniffing the ground, let out a low growl and froze, his hair standing on end. His gaze was fixed on the wall of fog just ahead. My heart hammered against my ribs. I followed his stare, squinting into the grey abyss. At first, there was nothing. Then a shape began to resolve from the mist. It was huge, far larger than any bear. It walked on two legs, its movements slow and deliberate. The figure was covered in long dark hair matted with mud and leaves. It was a silhouette from folklore, a creature of myth, stepping directly out of the pages of a storybook and into our waking nightmare. I was paralyzed by a mixture of terror and awe. My mind screamed Bigfoot, but it felt impossible, absurd. The creature took a few more lumbering steps forward and then stopped, about 50 yards away. It seemed to be looking right at us. Its sheer size was overwhelming, its presence ancient and powerful. I couldn't move, I could barely breathe. Then it slowly raised a massive arm, and in its hand, held delicately between thick, powerful fingers, was a familiar object. It was muddy and battered, but unmistakable. A worn leather Stetson, my father's hat. The creature stood there for a long moment, holding the hat out as if in offering. It didn't make a sound. The silence was profound, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the debris. It felt like a sacred moment, a communication that transcended words. It wasn't menacing, it was solemn. It was as if this guardian of the forest was returning something that had been lost, showing us a sign. Slowly, carefully, it placed the hat on a large, flat rock at the edge of the debris pile. It gave us one last, long look I can't describe, but one that felt ancient and filled with a strange, wild intelligence. Then, as silently as it had appeared, it turned and walked back into the fog, disappearing completely. For a minute, my mother and I just stood there, stunned into silence. Had we imagined it? We both looked at each other, our eyes wide, and then we looked at the rock. The hat was still there. We ran to it, stumbling over the slick mud and tangled branches. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was real. It was his. The hat was our only clue, our renewed spark of hope. We showed it to the volunteer searchers, telling them exactly where we'd found it. Something put it there, I insisted, leaving out the more unbelievable details. Fueled by this new lead, they focused their search on the massive debris jam. It was a treacherous task, a tangled mess of logs, roots, and wreckage. 2 days later, they found him. He was alive. He had been washed into the logjam, pinned beneath the wreckage with a broken leg and other injuries, but he had found a small air pocket. He had survived on rainwater, drifting in and out of consciousness. He was weak, hypothermic, but alive. When my father was finally lucid in the hospital, I asked him about the hat. He remembered losing it in the torrent, the last thing he saw before the water consumed him. He had no explanation for how it ended up on that rock. When I cautiously told him what we saw, he just looked at me with tired, knowing eyes. He'd spent his life in those woods, and he knew they held secrets. Some things, he whispered, his voice raspy, are better left unexplained. We just have to be grateful. I don't know what to call the creature we saw that day, a myth, a protector of the forest. All I know is that it appeared from the fog when we had lost all hope. It didn't rescue my father directly, but it led us to him. It returned a symbol, a piece of our family, and in doing so, it gave us back our world. Our cabin is gone, but our family is whole. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick and heavy over the mountains, I look out into the woods and I whisper a quiet thank you. Thank you for watching over us. Thanks so much for watching our story. It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, hope can appear in the most unexpected of ways. If you found this story as incredible as we lived it, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the wild corners of the world. Stay safe and never stop believing.